Hi. So I'm sorry about today. Today's been crazy. We have the flu. Um, but I am here to teach you how to do flats in Illustrator. So we are learning how to make fashion flats, and if you need to ask me any questions, you can post them on the discussion board. Um, no one's asked any yet. So, fashion flats are technical illustrations. They differ from illustrations, fashion illustrations like the ones we've been doing, because we don't normally show the body with them, and also we use them, we show every single seam on them. We use them to send to the factory in order to get garments made. So this is an example of a fashion illustration where it shows the body and it's a little bit stylized. um, and these on the right are fashion flats, so they have every single seam shown, how the back is attached, specific details of the lace. So for um, for our homework, you can read through this as well. Um, you need to be as detailed as possible in your illustrations, and you're going to clearly represent your design. We are going to talk about color today, but some flats don't include color. The ones you send to the factory wouldn't include color, and there are other types of flats that are called like floats. I don't know if this article gets to them, where you can have a more colored garment. So that's this link. The first step in drawing any flat would be to download a template. So this is the basic female template in the folder on this week's assignment, Library of Croquis Flats. There are all sorts of flats, so if you were going to make a collection later on, that it did involve 4 to 6 year old children, we could get that flat. Oh, it's huge for some reason. That's okay. You can download it and resize it to whatever size you need, obviously. And we can all use the same flat template or the same croquis, because we don't show this in the final product when it comes to flats. So I am going to move to Illustrator after downloading those, and I can actually see the basic flat template right here on my computer. So I am going to go to create new in Illustrator, and we're going to go to tabloid. It really doesn't matter what size you work in Illustrator, because Illustrator resizes things, because Illustrator is, wait for it, a vector program. Yes, it's a vector program. So when you resize stuff, unlike a pixel-based program, you can you don't have to worry about things getting out of proportion. Not out of proportion. You do have to worry about that, but pixelated or blurry, or aliased. Aliased is another word for pixelated. So I'm just going to drag and drop that image in here. So we might have talked, I'm going to rescale it. You have to hold shift for things not to get out of proportion when you rescale things in Illustrator, but you can do it at any time using the black selection tool, unlike Photoshop where you have to like select and then transform things. Like Photoshop, since I dragged and dropped that file in instead of like pasted it in, there's this X through it, which in Illustrator represents that it is not an embedded image. So right now, if I saved this image or if I saved this file on a school computer and I brought it to my home computer or just a different computer at the school or wherever, and opened it up, it would lose track of this image. So it's nice to hit embed. Embed means that now this image is part of your Adobe file, and when you save and bring it to any computer you use, it will still be attached. And notice it doesn't have an X in it anymore. So that lack of X means that there is no link to the file anymore. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer and talk about the layers panel in Illustrator. The layers work a tiny bit different than they do in Photoshop. So in Illustrator, you can have as many shapes and objects on the same layer as you want. So I want that line back. Or maybe it's there, it just doesn't have any, doesn't have any stroke on it. Property panel is at the top in Illustrator in my view right now, but we can talk about that a little bit later. I work in layout. Illustrator automatically launches in Essentials, but layout shows you a more Photoshop-like view. So I would probably switch yours to layout. I'll probably address that again in a minute. But the layers panel, I have it up here at the top with my libraries panel, but I have adjusted this. You can find your layers panel by going to Window, Layers. So notice I don't have 3 new layers on here like I would probably in Photoshop, depending on how I made these. I can still move them all around individually, and I can see each of these individually if I click on the little caret next to it. Normally I don't open the caret and I just click on things to select them, but sometimes it's nice to see everything that's on a layer. Normally though, we work with so many objects on each layer that it would get overwhelming to look at all of them all the time. It's just kind of the way we draw in Illustrator, or at least I end up with that. So we don't want to accidentally be selecting this all the time while we draw. For example, you can select individual anchor points with the white selection tool, right? And you can move individual anchor points like this. And you can anchor points are these points that make up the path. And actually I have smart guides on, view smart guides checked off. So when I hover over things, I can see what they're called actually. This is called an anchor. And that way you can make sure you're clicking on the right stuff. So you can select more than one anchor point at the time by clicking and dragging, and then click and drag on 2 of them at once. But you wouldn't be able to do that if you were on top of this image and everything was on the same unlocked layer. See, if I try and click and drag, I click and drag on the image and not on my trapezoid here. So we are going to make a new layer for our drawing. I'm actually going to delete this, but if you had drawn something on the wrong layer and you wanted to keep it, the easiest way that I would do right now is actually go to Edit Cut or Control X, and I would create a new layer. And the easiest way to lock this layer is to double click on it and choose template. You could also just choose lock, but template is nice because it dims the images to 50%. A lock symbol shows up there, and this symbol changes. I'm not sure why it changes from the eye, but maybe just to let you know it's a template. And we can no longer click and drag on this. I'm going to go to Edit Paste or Control V, but it's telling me I'm pasting on the wrong layer. So I'm actually going to hit No and make sure I'm on the right layer. It was asking me if I wanted to unlock this, and I just spent some time locking it. So there we go. There are my two shapes. And now with the white selection tool, if I wanted to click and drag, I can freely click and drag. The black selection tool selects the whole shape, and the whole shape is moved around by the black selection tool. Okay, the white selection tool can also move the whole shape. If it's already been selected with the black selection tool and you go to move with the white selection tool, it probably will move the whole thing. But the white selection tool is mostly used for moving individual anchor points, or at least adjusting anchor points, and something that's called handles, which we'll get to a little bit later. So I'm using my mouse right now, but I wanted to, since we're focusing so much on the Wacom pens and drawing with them in Photoshop, I wanted to address first how to draw with the Wacom pen, which isn't how I normally intro flats, but I think it'll be worthwhile. I'm using the same screen that you guys have at school, and I'm going to choose the pencil tool. The pencil tool is probably hiding under the shaper tool, and the pencil tool is what is going to allow us to draw unimpeded lines. Okay, the brush tool does it like adds stroke to the lines, and the pencil tool just draws pure vectors with like whatever stroke you have on it automatically. So I am going to start drawing. And I'm going to draw a t-shirt flat with you guys. I'm actually just going to draw half of it. And we can see that it didn't do a perfect job, but what's nice about drawing with the pencil is that I can adjust with the white selection tool, which is really called the direct selection tool, and you can hit A to access it in the shortcuts. I can select the anchor points that it messed up on, like I'm going to zoom in. It's easiest to zoom in if you have something selected that you want to zoom in on in Illustrator. Illustrator automatically zooms in on whatever is selected. Sometimes that can be jarring. So I can select this anchor point, and up in my properties panel, and again, I want to address that the properties panel will be in a different place if you're on essentials. So I'm actually going to change it to essentials. So when you first launch Illustrator, it will probably look like this. And there's no properties panel on the top, and the properties panel is just one of your normal panels that's on the side. Like you could go to window properties, which you could do at any time, and like toggle it on and off. But you always want to access your properties panel, and I just think that having it in the top, it makes it so much more like Photoshop as well. And essentials, I'm just not sure about it. So I always teach on layouts because I think it looks the most like Photoshop and it makes transitioning between them a lot easier. And we're always talking about both. So in my properties panel, I have this one anchor point selected with my white selection tool, which selects individual anchor points. And I can come up to the convert tab and I can convert this to a corner point. Right now, the brush decided, or the pen decided, that it was going to be smooth, but I want that to be a hard corner under the armpit. And we're going to click there. And there we go. So I can now adjust any of these anchor points that I don't like. And we can talk about handles. So handles tell the shape what direction and how far to go. Okay, they tell the vector how far to go. These handles are not where the line intersects, right? The line intersects with the anchor points, and it is guided by the handles. Okay, the handles, they are just telling it what to do. They aren't the line. Okay, a lot of people when they click on this, they would be like, oh, why did these extra lines appear? They aren't permanent. If you deselect by clicking anywhere else, you don't have to go to select deselect in Illustrator. You can just click somewhere else, unlike Photoshop where you always have to go to select deselect. So I'm just going to make this a nice armhole curve. I'm following this armhole. I also want to make sure that I'm not going too far over this center line right now. And I actually don't need this anchor point at all. This is an extra one. So because I don't need this whole line segment, I can just click this and then hit delete on my keyboard. This one, it could stay here, but I'm going to remove it by switching to the pen tool. We haven't discussed how to draw with the pen tool yet. I am going to, but the pen tool can also be used to remove anchor points. So if I have this anchor point selected, I can switch to the pen tool, and if I hover over this, it will automatically get a minus sign next to it. Right now it has a star next to it. That means the pen tool is ready to start a new line. But if I hover over this, it gets a minus sign next to it, which means it will remove this anchor point without deleting the path. Okay, so we click and no more anchor point. If we deleted the anchor point, I'm going to hit Control Z. If we deleted this with the white selection tool, it would delete the whole line segment, the line segment on either side of it. So instead, we just don't want the system telling us we have to go through this point anymore. We can choose minus. In general, you want to aim to get as few anchor points as possible to kind of look smooth. And actually, the pencil tool will do some of that smoothing automatically. Um, so we can talk about how to adjust how much smoothing it does in a minute. So if we, I'm back on the white selection tool, and we can actually adjust and get that curve back into this shape because we have a handle here. Um, so, all right, I'm going to reflect this shape now. We drew the right half of her body, my left, and now we're going to flip it over to her left half of her body. All right. So we are going to do that by going to Object and Transform and Reflect. And I'm going to hit Copy. So we can check off Preview, and it's going to flip over itself right here. So now this, you can kind of see that this would line up with the right half of her body. So that's good. So I'm going to hit Copy because we need one for the left and one for the right. And if I click in this empty space right here, it won't move because even though this shape is selected, it doesn't have any fill on it. There's nothing there that I'm clicking on, so I have to click on the path right now. Let's talk about fill and stroke before I join these into one shape. So I'm going to separate these a tiny bit. I accidentally double clicked on this and I entered something called isolation mode where I can't click on anything else, and I might get frustrated if I didn't know how to exit it. You can exit it by clicking on this arrow, or you can hit the escape key. So the fill and stroke in Illustrator are controlled in a couple places. There are two boxes that are in your toolbar that are kind of the most automatic place that I look anyway. And if you double click on these, you will get a little color picker, and we can choose a new color. We're choosing the fill color right now, filled with yellow. The fill color is this solid box. If I hover over it, I get a of the word fill, and the stroke is the box that has kind of a hole in it. And right now the stroke is not the active color. If I pick a color, for example, over here in my swatches panel, it will change the fill color because the fill is in front. Okay, if I want to change the stroke color, I just have to click on the stroke. I can click on it over here in my tool panel, and now it's in the front. Okay, and we can pick a new color for it in our swatches panel, or like I said, you can always just double click on it over here if you don't want to have too many panels open or if you're confused by it. Here we go. So now we have a tiny green stroke around this. So up in the properties panel is actually another place you can adjust the fill and the stroke. You can choose from these colors for both of them. You have to have it selected for it to make changes to that object, obviously. And up here we can also adjust how thick the stroke is. So if I want a much thicker green stroke, we can go like that. In general, I would say that we almost exclusively use black for the outlines, and we generally work on a 1-point black stroke. That's just industry standard of flats. So if we add fill to this flat, you will be able to, or this side of the flat, you'll be able to see definitely these are two separate sides. And this can cause issues later on, especially when you're trying to adjust stuff. So, especially for your initial homework assignment, which is to make a fashion flat library, which includes making a pair of pants, making a skirt, and making a t-shirt. I think those will be the ones that I require. Uh, for your fashion flat library, you want to make really nice closed shapes that are easily adjustable into other flats. So I am going to join these two shapes together. So if I have to do any adjusting of the neckline, make it a V-neck or whatever, I wouldn't have to move two anchor points every time. There's also other benefits that in more advanced flat drawing you would come across in terms of patterns and printing errors. Sometimes if you don't join shapes, there can be a small seam down the center. So we need to join these two shapes. And actually before I join them, I want to talk about join, the join function. We get to it by right-clicking when we have something selected and choosing join. So I'm going to draw a couple random shapes and zoom in on them. Okay. I have the black selection tool on right now, and the black selection tool moves whole objects. The white selection tool is how you edit the shape of the lines. And the if we select both of these shapes right now and we right click and choose join, it's not going to do what we expect. It doesn't close the shape into one closed shape, and it connects these two lines with a solid black line, even if they were exactly on top of each other. It would always join them with a solid black line, and it also decides which ends to join randomly based on which ones are closer. Right, so there's like this extra anchor point in there now. So joining with the white selection tool is much superior. I'm going to hit Control Z until we have our two shapes. So if I just select the two ends and I'm selecting them by clicking and dragging a box around them like I talked about earlier, if I select the two ends and right click and choose join, I can see that it doesn't do much better. It just joins them with a straight solid line. So we don't have to do that. There is a way to get them to be just one anchor point, and that is with the average function first. So this time, instead of dragging a box, I am going to click on one, and then I'm holding shift and I'm clicking on the other, and now I'm going to release shift. Then we are going to choose right click average and right click join. I forgot to choose average first. So select them, right click average. We do want to average them in both directions, so they'll be exactly on top of each other. I made a mistake. All of the anchor points were selected. So what happened is it turned all of the anchor points on one spot, or it put them all on one spot. So I can tell they're all selected because they're all red right now, and that was my mistake. It must have happened when I undid or something. So instead, I just need these two selected, and I can tell these are the only two selected because they are the only two that are red, the red anchor points, which are squares. The handles show up red, but they're circles, and they only show up near the anchor points that are selected. So with those two selected, and only those two, we are going to choose right click average, average in both directions. It puts them directly on top of each other, right? There are still two anchor points here though, right? I could click and move them separately and that would be annoying. So I right click average first and then right click and choose join. So the join has turned these into one anchor point. Let's bring it to the shirt. All right, I'm going to select those two anchor points by dragging a tiny box around them, or you could select one and then hold shift and select the other and then let go of shift. And then we right click and choose average and we right click and choose join, and this becomes one shape. Notice there are still two anchor points at the bottom, and they are not connected by a solid line but by the edge of the fill. So we are going to select both of those anchor points, average them, and join them. What can be frustrating is these are now not smoothing anchor points, right? So this is a smoothing anchor point where when you click and drag on the handle, it moves both sides of the path so that the path through this anchor point is still a perfectly smooth path. This is a corner anchor point. Even though it has handles and is joined to curved paths, it has it can be a corner, okay? To make it a smoothing point, you again come up to convert. It's the same thing I did earlier with this anchor point when it was accidentally a smoothing point. Instead of a corner, we came up here. So again, we select this guy with the white selection tool, and then we can come up and we can choose smooth, and now it's a smoothing anchor point and it will always be smooth. So I'm going to do the same thing up here. You can end up with these butt shapes when you're drawing. This happens a lot. So to get rid of that, you choose convert. All right, we're going to draw arms now. We have our body. Here we go. Again, I'm going to draw with the pencil tool. And if I just started on this anchor point and I came down and I drew this, this might look okay, but when you fill it with color, it's gets this awkward line here. And in general, I encourage you to make colored flats because they look much better in the portfolio. I'm just straightening up this arm with the white selection tool. So I am actually going to use the stacking function of Illustrator to make this work, right? Even though all these shapes are on the same layer, layer 2 here, they have an order to them. If I come and I put this path in between them, because I made this first and this second and this third, they have an order to them. So we are going to use that in order to keep working. So if I select this and grab the pencil tool, I can hover over my end anchor point and keep drawing. Or I could just delete this and draw it again. But I am going to hover over it, and that slash means it's going to continue. Out here, that star means it's ready to make a new line. Slash, ready to continue. So I'm going to come around and make this big sloppy shape. And we are going to send this to the back. So like I was saying, right now it's in the front, and it's even in the front of this shape. So we are going to right click, arrange, and choose send to back. You have to send it all the way to the back because there could be a lot of shapes on here in between it and the t-shirts. So send it all the way to the back. There it is. So this looks pretty good, except that it comes out over the top right there. So I'm just going to grab my white selection tool and adjust that line. Sometimes you have to click and then click and drag on stuff because, like I said, sometimes the white selection tool will accidentally select all of your anchor points when you only want it to select one. So I'm actually going to convert this point up at the top in the properties panel to a corner. And there we have our t-shirt. Let me delete this. I have ruined this side. Well, we will make it match eventually. I'm gonna reflect this over there. Object, transform, reflect, and hit copy. Now we have our t-shirt flats, and I would probably make a back to it before calling it completely done. So we would grab this and go to edit, copy, edit, paste in back. And if we don't deselect in between choosing paste in back, we can switch to the white selection tool and adjust the back of the shirt. So let me show you another way to do that, which is copy and paste this. Control C, Control V, edit copy, edit paste, however you want to do it. And we get this lined up in front of it, and we raise the back neckline. The back of the neck always has, well, almost always has a higher neckline because the back of your body has, the back of your neck at least has less mass to get around. If you look at a t-shirt laid out flat on the table, you would be able to see its back neckline. So I'm going to right click and choose arrange, send to back. So from here, you could put all sorts of different details on it. I'm going to keep it really simple right now, and we are just going to draw right on top of it with the pencil tool a neckline. We could even draw just half a neckline. Or you can learn how to copy and paste using the white selection tool. So because we joined these into one anchor point, if we select that anchor point with the white selection tool and we choose edit, copy, edit, paste, we will get that line segment with the lines to the we'll get that anchor point with the line segments on both sides of it. So now we just need it to not have a fill, right? If we change the fill color, you'll really be able to see what's happening here. It has its own little fill of green. The inside color is green. So I am going to make sure that the fill is in the front in my tool panel. And I'm going to choose this Ghostbusters symbol, the red slash none. Got to make sure that this is selected first, and then make sure that the fill is in the front, and then choose the Ghostbuster symbol. So now this shape has no fill on it, and if we put it over something else, you'll see like the shape behind it. And we're gonna get it in place and just move these endpoints with my white selection tool. And then you can adjust any handles. All right, you could keep adjusting until it looked good, but I am going to move on to drawing some pants. Those went a little bit outside. So I'm going to make a new layer for my pants. I can double click on layer 2 and tell it that this is my t-shirt. Before I move on, we normally make the back of flats gray. So you can tell, not that dark, but so you can tell that it is a different layer and not the same piece of fabric or another seam. So even though that would be made out of this brown, we're going to put it back there. So I am going to create a new layer, and we are going to lock the t-shirt layer, or just shut it off by clicking on the eye. And we're going to start drawing some pants, and then we're going to draw a skirt. For pants, again, I am just going to I'm going to use the pen tool to draw pants. You could just draw it with the pencil tool again, but I'm gonna use the pen tool this time, which is another option for drawing in Illustrator. So we can choose view rulers is how I'm going to start. And you want to make sure we're going to drag out a guide to be on the center. And this is going to allow us to make sure everything is really precise when we're drawing. So this is just another option. Instead of just eyeballing the guides on the template layer, you can have a guide that your system will actually lock to as long as you have smart guides on. Smart guides is what allows those little pink labels to show up whenever we hover over anything. So that's rulers and guides, and you really want to make sure your guides are locked. So you go down to view guides, and I'm going to choose lock guides. If you don't lock your guides, you end up selecting them accidentally, and then it gives you error messages. So lock those guides. So I am going to click with the pen tool to make straight lines. Okay? And I could keep clicking and continue to make straight lines. Instead, I want to tell it that this next anchor point is going to have curves on either side of it, okay? Because this baby's got curves. She's got hips. So we are going to click and drag, okay? So I'm clicking and I'm holding, and there is my curve shape. And then I can click and click and click. And again, I am not closing the shape at this point because I'm going to reflect it and join them into one shape. But I am actually just going to hit enter here, which will end my line, because some people get confused how to end it, and the only way they know how to end it is to come back here to this spot. But instead, I am just going to hit enter. No more line. And now we're going to switch back to the white selection tool and make any edits. Like if we had accidentally made this really tall like that, we could come back in and edit. So just like I showed you with the pencil tool, Sometimes the pen tool can be used just to get your anchor points in the right spot, and then you can come back on a second pass and clean things up to be really precise. So right now this doesn't have any fill on it, which I'm not sure why that happened. But I can just, or any stroke on it even. So you can't even see the line I made, but it is there. So with it selected, I can come up and tell it I do want a stroke on it. So again, there's no line in the center there. Nothing. No line right there in the center front seam. We can draw that in afterwards. Honestly, it depends on the pants you're constructing. We are then going to flip this. So select it. Objects, transform, reflect, and we can preview it to make sure it is flipping in the right direction, and we're going to hit copy. So now we have two, and we can slide this over. And it's a lot easier to join pants together if they don't have fill on it. If they have fill on them and you try to join this center seam, you would grab the white selection tool and click on here, and you would accidentally move the whole thing. So you can't click and drag that little box as easily you can't click and drag that little box as easily when they have fill. Like, you would have to start down here and click and drag up. So I think it's easier if they both are on Ghostbusters for the fill. Ghostbusters. Okay, no fill in them. Ghostbusters, I'm just referencing the logo of Ghostbusters with that little slash through it. So I'm going to come up to my white selection tool, click and drag so I can select both of these anchor points, right click, average, right click, join. Then if I wanted this to be curved, right now, because I drew a straight line there, this is like a hard anchor point, a hard corner. So I am going to make it a smoothing anchor point by coming up to my properties panel and clicking convert to smooth with it selected with the white selection tool. So there, I can do that. So I'm going to do the same thing with these two, select around them, right click, average, right click, join. And there we have our pants. And we could give them a fill. And we could draw any shape on them. Like, I could copy and paste this waistband again. Make sure it has no fill. And rescale it. We could rescale it with the black selection tool or the white selection tool. So there you have it. Let's draw a skirt really quick, and then if you, well, I'm going to make the back of these pants. So edit, copy, edit, paste. We can line them up and then raise up the waistband and turn it to be a medium gray. Make sure it's selected with the black selection tool, and then make sure the fill is in the front, and you can choose a new color, and then we're going to send this to the back. There she is. Let's add stitch lines while we're here. Let's say there would be another stitch line right below this. Maybe this is an elastic waistband or a stretchy pant or something, because I'm not going to add a fly right now. I'm going to copy and paste this line. Um, and we are going to find our stroke panel. You can go to Window and choose Strokes to find it. Stroke, just stroke. Or it looks like a bunch of lines on top of each other. And yours might look like this when it first opens, but you can click and choose Show Options. And then there are two things we do when we make a stitch line. We make it a dashed line, and we generally give it a 2-point dash and a 2-point gap. And then we also give it a round cap. So I'm going to zoom in so you can really see what that does. Right now these stitches are all little rectangles, and if we give it a round cap, make sure it's selected, round cap. It really, this is just supposed to simulate that it is going into and out of the fabric. And that's how we represent stitch lines. Okay, so anywhere that there would be visible top stitching, you would have a stitch line. But anywhere where there would be a hard seam, where something was sewn and the seam would be inside, you do not have stitching. So like along the edges of pants, even though there's a seam there, they don't frequently have top stitching, so there wouldn't be any top stitching around the outside edge, but there might be top stitching on these lines. So I can copy and paste these line segments by clicking on them and having faith. They don't automatically look like they are selected because these anchor points don't have handles, but it is selected. And then you can, it's good practice to make sure that these don't have fill on them, even though they're flat and their fill would never show up. You can select them both at the same time even and check off dashed line and give it a round cap. So that is a nice option. If it's a knit, like on our t-shirts, let's go back to our t-shirt layer panel. Gotta make sure that the t-shirt layer is the one selected. T-shirts normally have 2 lines of stitching on them. So if you copy and paste this, Command F will put it in exactly the same place. We can make sure it has no fill on it, and then give it our stitch settings, and then I would copy and paste that. So Command C and Command F puts it exactly in the same place, and then we would have a double stitch line. And I would definitely take the time to adjust these endpoints. You really don't want any ends hanging over the edges. So that indicates a sloppy flat. And same thing for these. I could copy and paste it, get it lined up, make sure it has no fill on it. And copy and paste it again. And then with this one, like, we don't really have to, I'm using my black selection tool to move these around. We don't have to do that again for this side. We could choose to go to Objects, Transform, Reflect, and hit copy, and then slide these babies over. So that's stitch lines. We are going to make a skirt now, and if you made the t-shirt, the pants, and the skirt for your first homework assignment, assignment 1.1 or whichever, .1, That would be a great little library. Flat details we could get to another day, maybe. Um, so, but a flat library of those would be great for adapting any of your work. And I can kind of give you an example of how you would do that after I'm done making the skirt. So we're gonna make a skirt, and again, I'm gonna use the pen tool to draw it just so I can give you a little bit more exposure to the pen tool. It would be easy enough to draw with the pencil tool, and you could apply similar techniques, but I am going to draw it with the pen tool, which is my preferred way to draw flats. So I'm clicking and dragging to make a curved handle there. If you want a straight waistband, that would be fine too. Right now, it's making a dashed line. It's really subtle, but I want to turn that off. So I'm going to come out into an A-line skirt down here, and we're going to make a nice big curve there. So we are going to flip this just like we have all the other things. We could give it a fill first if we really wanted to. We'll give it a lighter fill. And we are going to go to Object, Transform, Reflect, or you can right-click, Transform, Reflect. And these have to be selected with the black selection tool before you flip them. If you have an anchor point selected, if I have this anchor point selected, we could even do 2 anchor points. If we have some random anchor point selected and we choose, choose these 2, right click, transform, reflect, or object transform, reflect. You can see that it reflects the anchor points. So that's not what we want. We want to reflect the whole shape, so it's got to be selected with the black selection tool. So right click, transform, reflect, copy because we need one for both sides. And there she is. We can get it tightly lined up, and then you select them both, right click, average, right click, join, right click, average, right click, join. And again, it's good practice to also make sure that these are smoothing anchor points. Okay. In this case, in the bottom, we are actually going to use this anchor point to make little waves of fullness in a minute. So again, this is still a corner anchor point, and I want it to be smooth. So let's add some fullness to the bottom of this skirt. We are going to add anchor points for this. So like we talked about earlier with removing anchor points, if we have a shape selected already, it doesn't work if the shape isn't selected, but if the shape is already selected and you move to the pen tool, then I can click along this and add anchor points, right? Out here, the pen tool has a star next to it, and that means it's ready to draw a new line. But right here, the pen tool has a plus next to it, which means it will add an anchor point. And these anchor points are actually born with handles. So you can see that this is the anchor point, and then it has handles on either side. So I'm going to add like 3 on each side of this skirt. And we are going to use these to create fullness. So all I have to do is select an anchor point and then click and drag on the handle, and it adjusts both sides of the anchor point. And this would work even if you drew that initial shape with the pencil tool. And this center anchor point, if we hadn't converted it earlier, it would have been a corner and we would have had to convert it now or move 2 handles now, which would have been so much work. So we converted it earlier. So now we have some nice waves. I turned these all clockwise, but if you turn them, if you turn them one clockwise, one counterclockwise, that can also look really nice. So you can adjust them as much as you want, right? If you want more curve, deeper curves, you can adjust it up more. And now we are going to add some fullness lines. So these are the lines that indicate that this is like kind of a fold in the fabric, not a seam, but just a moment where your eye catches the edge of the fabric. So you could draw this using the pen tool, but the line segment tool is actually really nice for this because you just click and drag with it. So these should be all different heights. And I generally start them from the anchor point and move upwards towards the kind of center frontish of the skirt. In there, I think that looks nice. So we are going to add stitch lines to the skirt, which you can actually do by selecting all these anchor points and choosing Command C, and then Command F is paste in front. And for a long time, if I had done that, these would have been separate anchor points, but with Photoshop or Illustrator 2020, these aren't separate anchor points anymore, and this is one solid line. So that's a really nice option, and we can just make sure that this has no fill, and we can make sure to put on our dashed line and our rounded cap. And then what we do is we line up each of these anchor points with their corresponding vertical lines. And this creates a nice effect. It looks pretty realistic. You can always adjust these, like this one is coming out a tiny bit onto this side of the fabric. So we can adjust it so it's straighter, and then it wouldn't do that. And we don't want any overhanging on the edges and stuff like that. Right, you can always adjust with the white selection tool. So we've added a skirt, and I wanted to talk about, I'm going to make the back of this first. Control or Command C, Command V, and we have 2 of them. And then we can adjust this so that it's higher. I want it to line up a little bit better. We'll turn it gray. And then right click, arrange, send to back. So I wanted to talk about like how you would make a different colored waistband, or at least my favorite way to do that when we've already drawn the whole shape, which is by using the Pathfinder tools. Particularly, we use the Pathfinder tool Divide, which is in the lower left-hand corner. There's all sorts of ways to do this. If this way doesn't feel right, I think I'm going to post a link to a playlist where this YouTuber, So Heidi, talks about like all these different ways to color flats and draw flats. So it's totally up to you. But I'm going to, for starters, I'm going to draw where I want this waistband to be. So I'm going to copy and paste this line segment. And for divide to work properly, the dividing line has to have no fill and no stroke, or just no fill. Sorry. It can have a stroke. It'll work fine if it has this black line on it, but if it has a color inside it, it won't work well. And then it has to have no fill, and the second thing it has to have is it has to be starting outside of the shape. So these aren't going to be here in the end. It's gonna clean this up when we choose Pathfinder Divide. Um, but here we have it. And again, you can find Pathfinder by going to Window Pathfinder. And we need to select both shapes. And then we choose divide on the Pathfinder tool. These other things will like union and they will minus shapes from each other. But divide is the one I use the most because then I can carve shapes up in an interesting way. These are still grouped and we have like a layering issue where now this is the frontmost object. But we know how to fix that. We just have to go to right click, arrange, send to back, just like our sleeves. We don't need it that far back because now the back is in the front. There we go. So sometimes that stacking can get away from you. They're still grouped though. These, when you click on them, they're connected together. So you just have to right click and choose ungroup. And now I can select them separately and I could put a separate waistband on it. Or I could have drawn that waistband as a separate piece initially, and I could have made it thicker than the waistband, right? So then if I needed to do any adjusting on this end of it, I could easily do that, right? That's the benefit of drawing those t-shirt armholes that way. If I need to adjust these armholes so that they go deeper into the body, I can easily do that because my sleeve is so deep into the body and uses the overlapping function of Illustrator. Okay, so I wanted to talk quickly about how you would get your patterns in here from last class, because for homework you were supposed to you're also supposed to create front and back flats for the garments designed in assignment 3.2 and 4.2. So in those two assignments, you used repeating patterns and you put them onto fashion illustrations. So we are going to take those repeating patterns and put them into Illustrator and onto our flats. So for assignment 4.2, you guys had to make your illustration or your repeating pattern in Illustrator, and then I had you bring that repeating pattern to Photoshop. So your repeating pattern is already in Illustrator in a way, and all we have to do is open up that file. So I made that Sabrina pattern. I forgot. Here it is, and if you remember, this is what I had you export to bring to your Photoshop file. But if you go to your swatches panel, we also learned that it saves your swatches. It saves your pattern in swatches. And the easiest way to get this swatch to show up in my flats, see, it's not there in this, is to copy and paste a shape that has this pattern in it. So like this star, if we draw any shape and we fill it with this pattern and we copy it and we go to our other file and we paste it in here, it will show up in our swatches, and we don't even have to keep that shape. I just deleted it. And there it is still in the swatches. So now I can click it and choose that shape. I had you design transparent repeating patterns, which is totally fine. It just means that we need to add another layer on here. So we can go to edit copy and choose edit paste in front. And now there are 2 t-shirts there. And when I apply this to the front one, you can see it applies it to the whole shape. And to make it smaller, it applies it to the front shape and not to the back shape. So now we have what looks like a brown shirt with this pattern on it. We can make it smaller by choosing right click, arrange, right click, transform scale, or object transform scale. And if you scale the whole object down with this transform object selected, it will scale the whole shape. So you want to uncheck that. And we are only transforming the patterns. That should be the only thing that's checked in these little options. And then you can scale this to whatever shape. I hit cancel for some reason. If we were getting the repeating pattern from Photoshop, I am going to launch Photoshop. So I launched Photoshop here, and I actually didn't save the pattern we made in class, but I can access it, interestingly enough, through the Patterns panel, which you can go to Window, Patterns to find. So if I click and drag this pattern into here, it happens to already be the exact size as this page, because I think I drew it on an 11 by 17 page. But even if it started at a smaller scale, like this, we could crop this page to the single repeat. I'm gonna grab my crop tool and crop it. And all we're looking for is an exported JPEG. So even if it was smaller, you could crop it and get the original in there like that. I guess I'm assuming that you're working on the same computer that you always work on, and that it would automatically be in there when you logged in. That might not necessarily be the case. So maybe you didn't save it, and that would be too bad. In which case you could probably just recreate it in Illustrator really quick, or however you wanted to do this, pull this off. But there's mine, and I'm going to go to File, Save As, and choose JPEG. So you probably do want it to be a nice high quality JPEG. This image can be brought into Illustrator. There it is. And we can instantly go to Object, Pattern, Make. We don't have to vectorize it or anything. I wanted you guys to vectorize last week because it was kind of practice in a way of different ways to draw in Illustrator, and it gave you more control of the background and everything. But it's not necessary in this case because my background is all one color, and this image is designed to be a repeating pattern. So object pattern make, and it's going to give me this error again because of this X I discussed at the very beginning of the video. So this is linked to a file on my computer in that other folder. So instead we're going to hit embed. Now there's no X, which means it's linked to this file and not, it's embedded in this file, and it's not connected to some outside file that could get lost. So object pattern make. And it tells us that it's been added to the swatches panel, and we can see it in the swatches panel, the next one over from our little cat Sabrina the Teenage Witch one. This one is our beautiful flower one that we made in Photoshop. So we'll hit OK, see what it looks like. It looks pretty good. And then we can hit done. We don't have to do any adjusting because we already made sure this was good when we made it in Photoshop. So then with any object selected, let's go to a different layer for fun. We can make sure our fill is in the front and apply a pattern to it. And again, if we want to make it smaller, right click, transform scale, and uncheck transform objects, and then only the patterns, only transform patterns should be checked. I don't generally see patterns warped on flats too often, so there's no reason to do that, nor do I know how off the top of my head. All right, let's talk about how you would use these flats. You would submit screenshots of them for homework, all of these individual guys. But let's talk about how you would use them if you were going to adapt them into new shapes. So let's say for your homework for 3.2 or whatever, you designed a multi-tiered dress that's like long sleeve. Let's combine some of these shapes into one shape option. So I'm actually going to make a new artboard to do this. Illustrator allows you to work anywhere on the page or anywhere on your workspace, right? And your pages are these defined white artboards. You can make new ones using the artboard tool, and you can click new artboard up at the top. And then you can move back to any other tool to get out of this mode, which would allow you to change the scale of the artboards, but we'll generally leave them all at 11 by 17. So here is my second page, and what I can do is I could copy and paste things from page 1. So I'm going to delete that for now, and we are going to copy this over here, and we're going to make a front view and a back view for this shirt really quick, and then that will be, or for this garment, and that will be the end of the lecture. So we need this, and we need the skirt, and we are going to adapt these into, that's locked, so it wasn't letting me doing anything. We're going to adapt these into their new shapes. So I am going to make sure this is just back on its normal stuff. Okay. We'll copy this over here too. Now I want to put these on their own brand new layer. I want to put this t-shirt and this skirt on their own layer and be able to shut off this. So we can do that. We can create a new layer and then select what we want to move to a different layer. And then these dots represent everything that is selected on the page. And if you click and drag them to a new layer, it will automatically move them to that layer. Okay, so because they were on two different layers, I had to do it twice there where I clicked and dragged on those dots. So let's combine some of these things. We will let's delete some stitch lines because we don't need any. I'm going to leave that stitch line, but we don't need any of these. And we are going to make it long sleeve by selecting both of these anchor points and clicking and dragging outwards. Beautiful. And we are going to grab the skirt, and actually we might not need this back panel right now. Oops, I lost the bottom. So I'm actually going to group this except for that back panel. Right click, group, delete that back panel. We'll see if we don't need that right now. Try to get this lined up. Okay, so we can switch over to the shape builder tool after I've selected everything that I might want to combine. I can even include this back shape probably with no deep consequences right now. Or I could leave it out. Like when I select, I could hold shift and then not include the back of the garment. So select it all with the black selection tool, move to the shape builder tool, and click and drag along areas that I want to be combined. So I want these areas to all become one shape. So I'm going to click and drag a line through them. And there you have it. They are all one shape. It didn't handle my stitch line very well. I think I would recommend not including stitch lines when you're going to select. So I have this grouped, so I'm going to ungroup it before I join these two. So select the shapes, move to the shaper tool, and clicking and dragging through any of the shapes that I want to be joined. Why aren't you working? There you go. So now we have just like a stacking issue. So I'm just going to select these existing shapes that move to the front and choose right click, arrange, send to back. And there we have the front of the dress all joined. So let's add your pattern. Like let's say you wanted to use your semi-transparent pattern. Again, we would just copy and paste in front this exact shape and then apply the semi-transparent pattern to it. And we'll make these blue. And let's draw the back view to this dress. So I'm going to copy and paste all of it. And we can do this right next door, or we could make a new artboard. Artboard tool, click the new, and slide her onto her own artboard. And then we are going to bring this back to the front. And I guess it's up to you how you would do this. Like, I could try to work around things in a different way, but I'm actually going to delete the part that I had applied to the pattern and join these together all into one shape using my shape builder tool. right click, arrange, send to back. We just have to send these to back and then adjust that neck seam. And then we would have to adjust this. So the back shouldn't be gray in the back view. It's just the back of the neck should be gray in this type of view. So we are going to make that blue, and we are going to copy and paste in front the whole body, and then apply our transparent pattern there. And there you have it. I'm kind of annoyed that these cats are lining up exactly. Like when we go to overlap these for display purposes, but I should group them before I do anything. Right click, group, right click, group. When we go to overlap these, I just feel like it's really obvious that the cats and the spellbook are in the same place. So I'm going to double click on this, and now even though it's grouped and it will stay grouped once I hit escape, we're in isolation mode and we can edit groups in isolation mode. So I am going to choose this shape with the pattern in it and choose right click, transform, and this time we're choosing move. And again, I'm going to uncheck transform objects, and now when I move this with preview, doesn't seem to, sometimes it glitches out. So you gotta try it twice every once in a while when you change it from transform objects to transform patterns. But that's annoying. I don't know why it's glitching. This pattern should be sliding around. It is frustratingly not. I was able to, yeah, cat's still in the same place. Well, that's how you do it. I don't know why my computer is yelling at me. And then overlapping these looks really nice. And what you can do is you can add a drop shadow to it to make it look like two separate shapes. But I would have to refresh on how to add a drop shadow. So we can do that for like our final portfolio presentation, but this would be awesome for homework. If it has more detail, like collars, right, or something complex, what I would suggest is looking up other flats. So if I had designed something with a button-down collar, I would search for a button-down collar fashion flats. And I would practice drawing flats by tracing these images. I would copy and paste this into my Illustrator folder file. Oops. And I might do it with this tool, or I might do it with the pen tool or the pencil tool, honestly. But I would draw half of this collar, and then I would adjust it until I thought it looked good over here. Or I would at least use this for reference while drawing these other shapes, right? You would draw this kind of trapezoid shape of the front, and then you would draw a curved collar for the back. But if you have any trouble or you need me to record more example videos of how to draw other shapes this week, let me know. I know a lot of tips and tricks, but I am getting kind of tired here. So, oh, I said this was going to be a multi-tiered dress, and I was thinking that the way you would do that in this case is actually to copy and paste this whole shape. Edit, paste in back, and then you could just move this down for the next tier, and you could delete any of these upper anchor points that were messing with the shape. We might even move it to the side first and select all of these anchor points and delete them. So we would do something like that. And I could then go on and copy and paste all of the stitch lines down there too, which would look nice. And you could continue that all the way up. So definitely consider copying and pasting elements. Work smarter, not harder with flats is really the name of the game here. I forgot to put this back on. So Heidi's YouTube channel is amazing for learning really fast and efficient ways to draw flats, so I would definitely check her out. I'll post a link on the My Courses, and thank you guys again for understanding about today. We're both so sick. But I'll see you all really soon, and let me know if you have any questions.